You just finished a massive dinner. You couldn't possibly take another bite. But then, out comes the chocolate cake, and you're reaching for a fork. That second wind isn't a failure of willpower. Your brain is actively overriding your body's stop signals, using a specific biological backdoor. To understand this, look at our baseline wiring. An empty stomach secretes ghrelin, traveling to the brain and linking eating to pleasure. Because high-calorie fats and sugars were incredibly rare in the wild, the brain built a workaround. It learned to shut off leptin's fullness signal the moment these dense energy sources appeared. If a foraging group stumbled onto a tree heavy with sweet fruit, they couldn't afford to stop eating just because they felt full. They had to gorge themselves before the fruit rotted away, storing all that excess sugar as body fat for the lean times ahead. That exact evolutionary programming remains intact today. A mechanism that kept early humans alive has become a biological vulnerability in a modern world where high-calorie foods are endless. This ancient survival bypass is now frequently co-opted by modern psychological distress. When we face intense stress or struggle with low self-esteem, the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, goes into overdrive, creating a persistent sense of anxiety and mental anguish. Eating sweet, high-fat foods artificially triggers the evolutionary pleasure network. This rush temporarily mutes the amygdala's alarm bells, entirely silencing any biological signals telling you that your stomach is full. This is emotional eating. It is the brain medicating its own emotional pain by exploiting a nutritional loophole. When this bypass detaches from physical appetite and is driven solely by a mental health crisis, the behavior escalates into a severe eating disorder. In bulimia, a person might consume thousands of calories in a single sitting, frantically chasing that pleasure signal to numb the amygdala. But that temporary relief is replaced by intense self-hatred, leading to purging through vomiting or laxatives to quickly empty the stomach. Bulimia represents a catastrophic failure of this override. The brain traps itself in a compulsive loop that ultimately amplifies the exact anguish it was desperate to escape. The exact inverse of this behavior, and the most dangerous form of override, is anorexia. Here, highly intelligent individuals deploy immense willpower to internalize a flawed goal, the sustained avoidance of all food. This psychological distortion often begins with pervasive societal imagery. Our culture frequently elevates a frail, hyper-thin figure as the ideal standard of beauty. We introduce this standard through early conditioning. Toys often feature biologically impossible proportions, embedding these extreme shapes directly into the cortex, the brain's center for conscious thought, as a target to be achieved. As this psychological ideal takes root, the cortex begins to mobilize and dominate the lower brain centers. It effectively hijacks the subcortex, transforming the sensation of hunger into a feeling of intense disgust or aversion. The biological urge to eat is forcefully shut down, replaced by a goal that values thinness over survival. Anorexia proves the frightening strength of the human cortex. It can adopt a psychological purpose so intensely that it overrides the most fundamental biological instinct we have, the drive to stay alive. Pharmacological treatments often prove ineffective because these disorders are cognitive overrides rather than simple chemical deficiencies. The solution requires leveraging the brain's neuroplasticity to manually reroute its decision-making pathways. Take the case of Rebecca, a graduate student whose anorexia was so severe her brain had entirely rejected food. When repeated hospitalizations failed, her team turned to cognitive behavioral therapy. Instead of trying to force Rebecca to eat, her therapist looked for an alternative motivation. Knowing Rebecca used to love the gym, the therapist began discussing the mechanics of fitness training and muscle building. This introduced a new competing goal. Rebecca realized that to build muscle and achieve this new physical ideal, she needed nutrients. Eating was no longer the enemy, it was a required tool. By pitting a healthy, constructive motivation directly against a flawed one, cognitive behavioral therapy allows the brain to overwrite its own destructive programming. Whether we're looking at clinical eating disorders or the everyday urge to eat ice cream after a bad day, the underlying truth remains. Our brains are incredibly flexible. We have the mental tools to adjust our habits, but it requires conscious learning and the motivation to manually switch off that ancient hunter-gatherer default mode. Modern abundance and psychological distress will constantly try to exploit our biological vulnerabilities, but our conscious minds retain the final capacity to rewrite the code.